This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series.
Hello and welcome to Talking Turkey. I'm your host, Ahval editor David Lepeska, and with me today is Emre Deliveli, an economist and former columnist for Hurriyet Daily News who recently began contributing to this outlet, Ahval. Hello, Emre, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We are speaking on Thursday, April 9th, just over 4 weeks since Turkey announced its first coronavirus infection. It now has more than 38,000 cases, ninth most in the world, and more than 800 deaths. Turkey has the world's fastest rising number of cases, and several medical experts have estimated that it's on the road to becoming the next Italy or Spain, which I believe are the top two countries in terms of both infections per capita and total deaths. If this ends up being the case, the Turkish economy is surely going to suffer a great deal, as you detail in your Ahval piece this week. You argued that the tourism sector is likely to be the hardest hit. If you could tell me why you think that. Is it because you see the lockdown stretching deep into the summer holiday season? Or I shouldn't say lockdown, the quarantine, the isolation we have now.
Yeah, basically, it obviously part of this depends on when the quarantine or isolation, or whatever you're going to call it, is going to end. Not only in Turkey, but for the main countries that Turkey does business with in the tourism sector. What are these countries? The UK for one, Russia, and there are also some other markets as well. But the UK and Russia are Turkey's biggest, and also Germany, of course. And as of today, there are no flights in or out of Turkey. Other than a few exceptions. And the reason I made the argument that this would have a huge impact on the Turkish tourism sector is that most of Turkey's tourism revenues are earned in the summer. This is because we have a huge coastal sea, sun and fun tourism on the Aegean and Mediterranean coast, and these hotels are only open. Most of them are only open from let's say mid-April, end of April to November or so. So, even if in a positive case scenario where, the peak would be reached in Turkey and the rest of the world at the end of May or so, and then, tourists start coming in, let's say maybe at the end of June and July. Half of the season is already lost. And you have to also think that, if the flights start in and out of Turkey, and for Russian and British and German tourists can come to Turkey again, it's not going to pick up the next day, because for one thing, people need to gain some confidence, and also they need some money in their pockets, because many people are eating out of their savings or getting support from the government right now, not only in Turkey but also in other countries as well. They are not earning any income. So if they don't have enough money for vacation, they are going to postpone their vacation. So that's why I made the argument that it's going to be a very tough year for tourism for Turkey this year.
Here in the United States, where I am now, a lot of the summer holiday areas, especially along the East Coast, like Eastern Long Island, the Jersey Shore, and Vermont, have been inundated with New Yorkers getting away from the city, which is the U.S. epicenter. And many people who live full-time in those vacation areas have begun to resent the mass arrival of these wealthy New Yorkers who are not only buying up all the groceries and supplies, but also potentially bringing coronavirus. Istanbul, similarly, is the Turkish epicenter. I wonder if there's a similar scene around where you are now in the Mediterranean resort town of Marmaris, where you've run a small hotel for several years, I believe, as well. Are there people there from Istanbul kind of crowding the area and potentially bringing the pandemic?
So, the government closed the borders of about 30 cities, so which means, and where I am now, Marmaris is part of Muğla, and Muğla is one of these 30 provinces. So basically, this means that you cannot get in and out of Mura at the moment. But before they enacted this
That was
measure,
about, I think, like 10 days ago they did that or something. Yeah.
no, I think it was on
Maybe a
Friday
week.
or something, like maybe like more like 5-6 days ago.
Okay.
But I mean, basically, they did that because there were, reports, and there were not only reports. There were huge traffic jams, especially on the, on the Mura roads, because I mean, some of Turkey's most popular vacation spots, like Bodrum,
Bodrum,
Marmaris,
yeah.
Fethiye, are part of the Mura province, and just to give the just to add in some basic Turkish geography for your readers. I mean, the only way you can get to those resorts is through Mura, and there were all these pictures on social media a couple of days before the ban, with long lines of thousands of cars, people waiting, in queues and whatnot. So, I don't know the exact number for Marmaris or for the Aegean, but it has been reported in Turkish media that more than 100,000 people came to these vacation spots in the last couple of weeks, and mainly from Istanbul. And just to illustrate, the Turkish, the health minister, the Turkish state, only recently started disclosing detailed corona cases by province and by city and by town. And 2 days ago, when the Minister of Health was presenting the daily, the daily new cases and the number of deaths, he showed a very neat graph showing showing where we were seeing corona cases, and we are seeing some cases in Marmaris. I mean, Marmaris is not a very small town, which is 100,000, which is kind of normal to see some cases. But very surprisingly is that places with in the Mura province with very small year-round population. For example, there is this very, very small town called Akyaka, 25 minutes from Marmaris, and I was very surprised to see that there are cases in that small. I mean, I wouldn't call it a town; it is like a village. Only a couple of thousand people a year live there in the winter, and it is packed with domestic tourists in the summer. So obviously, what is going on is that most probably people from the big cities brought the coronavirus to this small village. So yes, we are seeing some of that as well.
Well, that's interesting. What about this influx of 100,000 or so people helping prop up the tourism and services sector in these areas? They must be, buying some food and ordering from restaurants, etc. Are they staying in hotels or Airbnbs or vacation homes?
No. The hotels. I mean, the hotels are shut down by the order of the state until the end of April. So I mean, most of these people either have holiday homes, summer homes, or they are kind of like renting out. So I mean, yeah, you are right that there has been some I'm sure that there has been some economic effect of this, but I'm sure that if you ask the residents of Bodrum and Marmaris and Akyaka and Fethiye and all these towns, they would have preferred that everyone stayed at home rather than you have this little bit of extra income.
What are you thinking for your hotel? Have you had cancellations for future reservations? Have you let workers go? And do you and your kind of hotelier colleagues there have any date in mind in terms of reopening?
I mean, in Turkey, basically, most of the hotels in Marmaris, but also in other areas, are, if you ask them officially, they are saying that they are planning to open in May. But basically, if you just talk to them off the record, you see that they are hoping to open in May, and they don't. I mean, they also know that this is not going to be possible. So I mean, more realistically, most people think that at the best case scenario, they would be very happy. Most people would be very happy if they could open their hotels by mid-June or end June or something like that. So in terms of letting workers go, I mean, we are seeing a lot of that, in the Marmaris area as well. I mean, I shouldn't just, speak about my hotel, but all the other properties in the region. So, but basically, our hotel and all the other hotels in Marmaris, most of our workers are seasonal, meaning that we would normally hire them, start hiring them at the beginning of April, because
right about now, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Normally, if this were a normal season, this is the time that, we would be hiring them. Obviously, we are not hiring anyone at this stage, which is, which is bad for unemployment. And but we and other hotels, we also keep some permanent staff. For example, just to give you the, percentages, in the high season in July and August, we have about 150 employees, and in the winter season we have about 20, 25, 30. So basically this means that these 120 people that we would normally hire on a temporary basis, we are not able to hire them at this point. If things go well, and then if it turns out that we are going to be able to start the season in mid-June or something like that afterward, then we are going to be starting hiring them in mid-May.
Right. If your hotel is a good measure, like stretch that across that whole Mediterranean Aegean region, that's tens of thousands of people not being hired.
Exactly.
You wrote in that Ahval piece that you don't fear hotels and other tourist-reliant businesses closing or going bankrupt because Turkish banks are generally very lenient. But what if this lockdown stretches into August or later?
Exactly.
How might these businesses survive the loss of an entire or almost an entire tourist season?
Exactly. So, I kind of like wanted to paint, an optimistic scenario, or kind of, because the point I made is that I wouldn't expect all of them to go bankrupt right away. Because some of them might have some cash reserves, and and also banks are extremely, as I said, and as you said as well, banks are extremely lenient on extending loans at this stage. But as you mentioned, if this goes on to cover the whole season, then this means that if this goes on until September or so, this means that the whole season is lost, which means that the loans have to be extended not only for 2 or 3 months more, but until the next summer season. Because remember, these are seasonal hotels; they don't earn anything in the winter. So if this guy, if this guy, the hotel didn't make any money until October, it wouldn't help him at all to extend his or her loans for 3 months or even 6 months, because she's not making any money until May of 2021. So then it's anybody's guess. Are the banks going to be able to extend the loans so much further as well? And then if they do, they are going to need help from the state, and then the state is going to need to recapitalize them at some point, and And the next question is, where is the state going to find the money from the IMF? It kind of, as you can see, it kind of adds up at each stage. It starts with the hotels. The next stage is the banks. The next stage is the Turkish treasury.
Right. You also say in the piece that in the next 3 months, Turkey owes about 18 billion external debt payments, but
Exactly.
the central bank reserves are already depleted, mainly because last year Erdogan took away the bank's autonomy. Particularly if the isolation doesn't end by late June or July, you see Turkey heading toward external financing issues, perhaps even a balance of payments crisis. And meanwhile, an unemployment crisis as well, as you see unemployment crossing 20% by the summer. What might all this look like? How would it feel to the average Turkish citizen if this were to happen?
Extreme financial difficulties. This is about having enough money to get by, not to starve. Because for one thing, Turkey got caught in this situation at a very bad time. For one thing, as you were mentioning, the reserve, the central bank doesn't have much reserves, so it cannot defend defend the currency anymore, and there is not much fiscal space either, because the government has been using its fiscal space to support the private sector for some time, and so And in terms of unemployment, even before this crisis started, Turkey had an unemployment rate above 13%. So I mean, if you look at the U.S. or other, developed countries or even most emerging markets, they entered this crisis with low unemployment rates, like 2%, 3%, something like that. Turkey is 10 percentage points more than that. So basically, you are seeing a huge unemployment, which means that the state has to step up more to kind of support these people with basic income. And the problem is that they don't have the resources to do so. So
speaking of that stepping up, what did you think of this draft legislation announced yesterday under which Turkey would ban layoffs for 3 months, with Erdogan having the option to extend that to 6 months? Will that help?
Sir, can you repeat that?
Maybe you didn't hear, I guess. There was draft legislation in Turkey announced yesterday. It seems like it's going to be approved. The plan is that the Turkish government would ban companies from making layoffs for 3 months, and Erdogan would have the option to extend that to 6 months.
Look, I mean, basically, I'm not talking as a hotel owner, but I'm talking as an economist right now. I mean, these look extremely good on paper and are very popular with voters. But I mean, just to ask a very simple question. I mean, if the hotel is not earning any income, how are they going to pay the wages? So it's basically there are two options. You can either let firms lay off workers and then provide some income support for them, as the US is doing, or as some European countries are doing. What you can do is that you can either prevent firms from laying off workers or induce them not from laying off by saying that you are going to provide a certain percentage of wages of the employees. And actually, this is what the Turkish, the first Turkish package announced three weeks ago or so, included. They had some, short-term wage allowances, which meant that the state would contribute. The state would support 60% of the employees' wages. So I mean, you need something like that, because I mean, just let me give you an example from my own hotel. Okay, I mean, the state tells me that I cannot lay off any employees, which is fine. But then again, I pay the wages by the revenue I make during the summer. If I cannot earn any money because my hotel is closed, what am I going to pay them with? I mean, I won't be able to pay them with seashells or something like that. So I mean, basically, the state is going to have to step in at some point, even if they prohibit firms from laying off workers.
Right. The issue, though, is, as you write, the funds that the government has set aside are nowhere near enough for the approaching army of the unemployed, and the stimulus and relief package of about 15 billion pales in comparison to those of other emerging markets. So what can Turkey do to find more funds to address the corona crisis? As you point out, interest rates are already extremely low, and Erdogan can't even afford to do a complete lockdown because Turkey needs the manufacturing revenues. Is the International Monetary Fund maybe the only option pretty soon?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I've been reading news for the last 2 days that they already asked for Fed, the American Central Bank, for swap lines even at the end of March. But I mean, I'm not sure how much money is going to come from that, and then they might end up signing up a swap line with the IMF. I mean, supported by the ECB or Fed as well, probably. But I mean, no one knows. I mean, even no one knows what the IMF is going to come up with at this stage. I mean, I'm not only talking about Turkey. I'm talking about other countries, because I mean, if you think about it, at the end of the day, the IMF's resources are limited as well. Because I mean, normally, if these were normal times, you would have only a few countries. Normally, only a few countries would have a crisis or liquidity or solvency issues at a certain point. I mean, if it's a regional crisis, then I mean you would end up with maybe like in the East Asia crisis in 1998, you can end up with several countries having problems at the same time. But now we are in a very unique situation, even more unique than the 2008, 2009 crisis.
Interesting. So it might be a case of the most desperate will only get the IMF funds, and maybe Turkey won't be among the most desperate.
I mean, it's not. It's not. I mean, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to determine at this stage what the criteria are going to be. The most desperate, or I mean, and also the IMF is going to have to. The IMF just cannot lend to anybody. It is bound to lend only to countries whose debt is solvent. It cannot, if the debt is not sustainable, and they have calculations to calculate. I mean, they have some methods to calculate if the debt is sustainable or not. So I mean, they either have to relax their guidelines, or maybe they are going to go, rather than traditional IMF programs, they are going to go for swap lines similar to the Fed, since so many countries are asking for help.
In the piece, you also mentioned rumors of rising tensions between Berat Albayrak, Erdogan's son-in-law, and Turkey's Treasury and Finance Minister, and the country's health minister, Fahrettin Koca. This is in line with a push and pull between public health and economic and political concerns that is happening in many countries around the world right now. How do you see it being resolved in Turkey, where the ruling AKP is surely concerned about losing more voters after last year's local election losses?
Exactly. I mean, it's my thinking is similar to my thinking on the IMF. Basically, Erdogan and his son-in-law and economy minister Albayrak, they would only go to the IMF if they will have to. Similarly, I mean, they are trying to postpone a total lockdown. I mean, and they are only going to go for a total lockdown if they understand, or they are convinced by the health minister or whomever else that this is the only other option. And the reason, as you mentioned, that they are not going for a full lockdown is that actually there are two reasons. One, I mean, they don't have the resources to support so many people out of work, and also they don't want a huge decrease in. They don't want a huge contraction in the economy because it would shake Erdogan's political power. So they are trying to. I mean, the reason they are resisting a lockdown is that they want to be able to. They are trying to get by this episode, and with the minimum economic contraction possible.
Mm-hmm. One of the most intriguing points you made in this piece is that because Turkey is an emerging rather than developed market, its economy is likely to be more negatively impacted by social distancing than, for instance, Europe or the US. The way I understood it is because Turkey's share of consumer goods and services that need people to be close together, like transport, entertainment, hotels and cafes and bars, is among the highest in the world, its economy is in greater danger. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, and this is actually, as I mentioned in the pieces as well, these are just the calculations by economics consultancy, Capital Economics. So that they have basically looked at the share of sectors that are likely to be affected most by social distancing, like tourism, restaurants, retail, transportation, and whatnot. And they see that even among emerging markets, Turkey is has one of the highest shares, which which means that the lockdown is going to have a bigger negative impact on the economy than other emerging markets.
Mm-hmm. In that column, you mentioned the government's half-baked measures. I think that term could apply to the government's corona response more broadly, which has been filled with half-truths, incompetence, and mixed messaging. One example is the Turkish Medical Association has been saying that the number of deaths is considerably higher than official figures because the health ministry is failing to correctly share data with the WHO. Another is face masks, which Erdogan just a few days ago said everyone must now wear in public spaces. First, the government banned any private sale of masks. Then it said masks would be distributed for free from post offices, which are known as PTT in Turkey. Then the plan was that the PTT would deliver them to your door if you signed up online. Then that website didn't work. Now, starting, I believe, today in Istanbul, Turkey's epicenter, masks are being handed out at pharmacies. So anybody who had been able to follow the news closely over the last few days would be totally confused or misinformed about how to get a face mask. I just wonder, is this the kind of policy leadership we've also seen in regards to the Turkish economy and financial issues these days? The new piece at Foreign Policy yesterday, maybe you saw it, by Aykan Erdemir, and a Georgetown student said that if Erdogan continues on his way he's been doing the last weeks, coronavirus will destroy Turkey's economy.
Yeah, I mean, probably. I haven't read Aykan's piece, by the way, but basically by delaying a total lockdown, he's causing the eventual loss to the economy. The eventual loss to the economy is going to be larger. So I mean, the longer it takes him to issue a full lockdown, the more negative, the longer we have to stay under lockdown, and the more negative effects on the economy we are going to have. Actually, I mean, I just, as I said, I missed Aykan's piece, but I just got a quite interesting piece by Koç University professor Sarva Demiralp. She and her colleagues, they calculate the cost on the economy between a lockdown in April and a lockdown in May, and not surprisingly, they find that a lockdown in April is better for the economy. It's going to result in less economic losses. So I mean, Erdogan needs to get on with the lockdown as soon as possible. Why is he not doing it? Because, as I mentioned, he thinks that he may get away with it.
Meaning you think that the economic cost will be less if they don't do the lockdown. They won't have to. I guess, I mean, the balancing act is, you say in the piece that Turkey can't really afford to go into lockdown, which is what Erdogan says, but can it afford not to? Maybe there will be so many deaths that it will be politically and economically damaging.
Exactly. So that's the other issue. I mean, there are, as you said, there's a lot of there are a lot of question marks on the exact number of people dead from corona, and so at a certain stage, just the loss in confidence. I mean, not only for the economy but also for the government is going to be unbearable.
So your sense is that the government needs to do the lockdown sooner rather than later, meaning by early May, or it's going to get worse and worse?
No, I mean, if I were them, I would even start it today. I mean, I wouldn't even wait for a full lockdown until May. I mean, May might be too late, because I mean, from other countries' experiences, we can see that the only way you can control this pandemic is by a total, very extremist lockdown. And countries which have not enacted a lockdown or not enacted one early on are like the UK or the US also are having huge increases in numbers at the moment. And I mean, we all know the case of Italy. I mean, there is the example of Italy right in front of our eyes. So I mean, in my opinion, the earlier he gets on with it, I mean, the better. And if he decides that he can ride out, he can get by without a lockdown, then he's going to find in 2 to 3 weeks or 3 to 4 weeks is that the number of new cases and the number of deaths are at such a level that he just has to do it anyway. So I mean, coming back to your question, in terms of comparison to economic policy making, I have seen this kind of like behind the curve, delayed response in economic policy making, especially monetary policy as well. I mean, there have been at least half a dozen or so instances in the last decade or so, where economists have warned the central bank to increase the interest rates because, I mean, the currency is depreciating, capital flows are accelerating, and they have been saying that each time all the experts were saying that if Turkey delayed the interest rate hike, monetary tightening, then it would end up with a huge hike later on, and each time that's exactly what happened. The central bank delayed the necessary hikes, and at the end of the day, when things got to an extreme bad level, they had to increase rates by a huge amount.
And now Turkey's economy and public health may depend on how long Erdogan drags his feet on the lockdown.
Exactly.
Emre Deliveli, economist and columnist, thank you so much for your time and insight. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.